After missing a scheduled check-in during a trip through Utah's rugged canyon lands, two 22-year-old women vanished without a trace. Investigators initially believed it was a tragic hiking accident, but the total lack of evidence was baffling. 3 years later, a discovery by scientists picking up a strange, repeating acoustic signal from a narrow canyon provided the key to what truly happened. On the evening of October 15, 2019, the anxiety in Rowan's chest wasn't a general worry. It was a precise dread that had been building since 7 p.m. His daughter, 22-year-old Imogen Velas, was supposed to call. This check-in was a non-negotiable safety agreement, a lifeline connecting their home to the remote, unforgiving wilderness of Utah, where Imogen was backpacking with her best friend, Olesia Kaspari, also 22. This was the end of day 4, and according to the meticulously planned itinerary Rowan had pinned to his corkboard, the women should have finished the most challenging segment of their route. They were scheduled to arrive at a small motel near a rural highway, resupply, and most importantly check in. By 8 p.m., the silence in Rowan's house was deafening. Every mundane sound, from the refrigerator's hum to the creak of the foundation, sounded like a phone ringing, only to fade into stillness. Rowan had argued vehemently against the trip. He understood the appeal. Both Imogen and Olesia were experienced hikers drawn to the stark beauty and profound isolation of the Utah desert. They had completed many trips together, but this one was longer, more remote, and led into areas where cell service was non-existent. The landscape was a labyrinth of slot canyons and sheer mesas, and the risks were substantial. When it became clear he couldn't forbid his adult daughter from going, Rowan insisted on strict precautions. They carried a high-end emergency SOS beacon, a device that could send a distress signal via satellite from almost anywhere. But Rowan, driven by a primal fear, demanded more. He insisted Imogen carry a handgun. It was, he argued, a last resort against wildlife or other unpredictable threats. Pragmatic and eager to ease her father's fears, Imogen had reluctantly agreed, tucking the firearm securely into her pack. Now Rowan paced his living room. The precautions were meant to ensure their safety, yet they hadn't prevented this silence. He picked up his phone, checking his call history one last time. The last contact was a photo message from 4 days earlier, on the morning of October 11th. It was a picture of Imogen and Olesia taken just as they were setting out. The image, reflected in the dusty window of their vehicle, showed Imogen on the right in a vibrant hot pink jacket and a purple headband, holding the phone and giving a playful pout. Olesia, next to her, wore a lime green windbreaker and an olive green cap, smiling softly. Behind them, the sun-drenched reddish-orange canyons loomed, the very landscape that had now seemingly swallowed them whole. The photo, time-stamped 9:14 a.m., was the last confirmed sighting of the two women. At 8:30 p.m., Rowan dialed the number for the motel. The desk clerk confirmed that no one by those names had arrived. The news landed heavily. This wasn't just a delay, it was a deviation from the plan. Imogen was organized and she kept her promises. Rowan hung up and immediately called the local sheriff's department. He explained the situation, emphasizing the missed check-in and the gear they carried. A formal missing persons report was initiated, and the vast machinery of search and rescue began to mobilize. The search for Imogen Velas and Olesia Kaspari was swift, but the terrain was notoriously difficult. The Utah Canyon lands are a geological labyrinth designed to confuse and entrap. The scorching days give way to freezing nights, and the landscape is filled with miles-long slot canyons prone to flash floods and sudden, unmarked drop-offs. Within 24 hours, a command center was established. The first critical discovery was the women's vehicle, found exactly where they had left it, locked and undisturbed. There were no signs of a struggle or discarded gear, suggesting that no foul play had occurred before they entered the wilderness. The investigation immediately focused on their intended route, but the sheer scale of the area was daunting. Helicopters began grid searches from the air, their rotors thrumming against the canyon walls as they scanned the vast expanses of slick rock and juniper scrub, looking for a flash of pink or green. On the ground, teams of experienced trackers and SAR volunteers hiked the known trails, while K9 units attempted to pick up a scent trail. But the desert yielded nothing. The slick rock terrain made tracking exceedingly difficult, and the complex canyon systems meant ground teams could be just yards away from someone and never see them. A troubling question dominated the briefings at the command center. Why hadn't the emergency beacon been activated? Investigators confirmed the device was registered to Imogen and appeared operational, but no distress signal had ever been received. The beacon's silence was ominous, suggesting a sudden catastrophe like a fall or a rock slide that incapacitated them both simultaneously, preventing them from deploying the device. Alternatively, they might be in a location so deep and narrow that the satellite signal couldn't penetrate the rock. Rowan Velas arrived at the search headquarters, his face etched with exhaustion and desperate hope. He provided investigators with detailed inventories of their gear and mentioned the handgun Imogen carried, which added another layer of complexity to the scenarios. Weeks dragged on, and the intense initial search scaled back as leads dried up. The initial media attention began to wane as the desert held on to its secrets. It was during this period of dwindling hope, the 5th week of the search, that an unexpected new element emerged. A specialized tracking team working far off the established trails in a rugged side canyon stumbled upon evidence of significant human activity. It wasn't a typical hiker's camp. Investigators were immediately airlifted to the site, where they found fresh excavation marks, deep scars in the earth, and discarded chemical containers, drills, and mineral extraction tools partially concealed under camouflage netting. This was evidence of illegal prospecting. The discovery electrified the investigation. The remote Utah desert was known to attract individuals who operated outside the law, and these modern-day prospectors were often transient, heavily armed, and fiercely territorial. The possibility that Imogen and Olesia had stumbled upon such an operation and met with violence offered a terrifying explanation for their complete disappearance and the silent beacon. The focus of the investigation shifted from a search and rescue operation to a potential criminal investigation. The atmosphere at the search headquarters grew darker as the abstract fear of the wilderness was replaced by the tangible fear of human malice. Authorities began the difficult task of identifying and tracking down the individuals involved. These individuals operated entirely off the grid, used cash and burner phones, and moved frequently. The investigation expanded, involving coordination between local law enforcement, the Bureau of Land Management, BLM, and federal agencies. Investigators spent weeks analyzing the evidence from the wildcatting site, tracing lot numbers on the chemical containers and analyzing tire tracks. They interviewed informants within the shadowy community of wildcatters, seeking any information about recent activity in the area. The effort yielded several persons of interest, men with histories of violence and confrontations with law enforcement. A multi-state manhunt began. The search area was re-examined, this time looking for signs of a concealed crime scene rather than lost hikers. The theory that the wildcatters were responsible provided a narrative that made sense. Rowan clung to this theory, clinging to the idea that if they had been taken, there was a perpetrator to pursue, a focus for his grief and anger. One by one, the identified suspects were located and cleared. The initial discovery of the illegal excavation site, while highly suspicious, ultimately proved to be coincidental. The wildcatting operation had been active, but it appeared to have been abandoned shortly before the women began their hike. The disappointment was crushing. The effort had consumed valuable time and resources only to lead back to the same agonizing uncertainty. As the harsh desert winter approached, the active search operation was officially suspended. The disappearance of Imogen Velas and Olesia Kaspari was classified as a cold case, and the prevailing theory among investigators reverted to the initial assessment. The women had suffered a tragic hiking accident in some unknown, inaccessible location. For 3 years, the silence persisted. The summer of 2022 marked nearly 3 years since the women had vanished. The case had faded into obscurity, and Rowan Velas continued his private search, returning to the desert periodically, but the hope of finding them alive had long since evaporated. He sought only closure. The breakthrough came not from law enforcement or a search effort, but from an entirely unrelated scientific endeavor. Dr. Davin Pruitt, a geoacoustic specialist from a prominent research university, was leading a small team in an extremely isolated section of the Utah desert, miles from the original search zone. Dr. Pruitt's research focused on the unique acoustic properties of the canyon lands, studying how microseismic tremors, the subtle, constant vibrations of the earth, propagated through the complex geological formations. His team was attempting to map the subsurface structure by analyzing how these tremors resonated within the rock, which required highly specialized, sensitive equipment and an environment free from human-made noise. They had spent several days hiking into a deep, narrow slot canyon, a profound natural silence ideal for their acoustic measurements. They were in the process of calibrating their primary instrument, a portable spectrum analyzer known as a Sinus Soundbook Mark II. This device, connected to a series of specialized microphones and sensors driven into the rock, was capable of detecting acoustic signals far beyond the range of human hearing, both subsonic and ultrasonic. Dr. Pruitt monitored the display, expecting to see the familiar patterns of low-frequency background noise, but the device registered an intense, unexpected anomaly. The readings indicated a powerful, persistent, high-frequency signal far above the threshold of human hearing. On the device, it was screaming, with numerical readouts spiking at 57.6 and 53.8, a volume level that far exceeded any natural background noise. Dr. Pruitt frowned, assuming an equipment malfunction. "Check the probe connection," he instructed his assistant. The assistant verified the connection and ran the calibration sequence again, but the signal persisted, a sharp, unwavering peak on the spectrum analyzer. The equipment was detecting a real signal, a sound that was omnipresent in the silent canyon, yet entirely inaudible to them. The team spent the next several hours trying to triangulate the source of the signal. It was unusual not only in its intensity, but in its consistency. Natural geological resonances tend to fluctuate, but this signal was stable, almost mechanical in its precision. It felt distinctly artificial. Dr. Pruitt logged the data, noting the precise coordinates and the signal's characteristics. He initially suspected it might be a rare geological phenomenon or interference from a distant communication tower. They concluded their measurements and hiked out of the canyon, leaving the mystery of the silent scream unresolved. Several days later, the research team relocated to a different area several miles away as part of their broader survey. This new location was characterized by a different geological formation, a high mesa scarred by historical mining activity. The area was dotted with dilapidated, unmarked, abandoned mines, notoriously dangerous relics of a bygone era. The team was surveying an area near one of these abandoned mining complexes when they set up the Soundbook Mark II. As the device powered up, the screen flickered to life, and the anomaly reappeared. It was the exact same high-frequency acoustic signature they had recorded miles away. The silent scream had followed them. Dr. Pruitt felt a sudden chill. The signal wasn't a localized geological phenomenon. It was being broadcast, and the unique geology of the region was channeling the sound, allowing it to travel through the rock over long distances. The slot canyon, with its narrow confines, had acted as a natural amplifier. He began to investigate the immediate vicinity, focusing on the abandoned mine complex. The main entrance was a dark, gaping maw in the side of the mesa. The old wooden supports were rotted and splintered. As he approached, he noticed something alarming. The structural supports of the abandoned mine had given way, causing a collapse inward. The ground at the entrance was noticeably disturbed, indicating that a significant weight had caused the failure, creating a hole through the fragile surface and into the dark void below. This didn't look like a slow decay. It looked like a sudden structural failure. The combination of an acoustic signal and this structural damage raised an unsettling question. Could someone be trapped down there? The idea seemed improbable, yet a persistent signal suggested an electronic device was active underground. Dr. Pute cautiously circled the collapsed opening, searching the ground for any other clues. The area was covered in a thick layer of dust and debris, making it hard to tell a recent disturbance from the site's general decay. He moved slowly, his eyes sweeping the ground. Then, partially hidden by a clump of dried sagebrush at the edge of the collapse, he saw it. It wasn't mining equipment, but a specialized water filtration straw, high-end hiking gear designed for emergency survival. It was relatively new, weathered but still in one piece. The discovery of the hiking gear changed everything. The abstract scientific anomaly was now a potential human tragedy. Dr. Pute knew that hikers frequently went missing in the desert. The filtration straw, combined with the collapsed mine entrance and the persistent electronic signal, painted a grim picture. He immediately got the team's satellite phone and alerted the authorities. He urgently explained the situation, describing the acoustic anomaly, the collapsed mine, and the discovery of the hiking gear. He gave them the exact coordinates. Recognizing the potential importance of the discovery in this remote area, the authorities started an immediate response. While waiting for the rescue team, they cross-referenced the description of the water filtration straw with a database of missing persons. They pulled the cold case file for Imogen's and Olesia Kaspari. The specific brand and model of the straw were rare. It matched the gear inventory provided by Rowan Ellis in 2019. After 3 years of silence, the desert had finally revealed a clue. Not a footprint or a distress signal, but an electronic scream detected by scientists looking for something else entirely. The coordinates provided by Dr. Pute led authorities to one of the most remote and hard-to-reach parts of the Utah desert. The positive match of the filtration straw to the gear carried by Imogen and Olesia revitalized the cold case investigation. The possibility that the women had fallen into the abandoned mine and that the acoustic signal indicated active electronic equipment demanded an immediate and specialized response. A specialized mine rescue team, made up of highly trained professionals with experience in the unique dangers of underground environments, was sent to the location. Their heavy equipment was airlifted in by helicopter, and they arrived at the site within 24 hours. The scene they found was intimidating. The abandoned mine was old, its history unknown, and its structure unmapped. The collapsed entrance, where Dr. Pute had seen the inward failure of the supports, was extremely unstable. The surrounding rock was fractured, and the remaining wooden supports were severely rotted. Any attempt to enter the mine without first stabilizing the entrance risked causing a secondary collapse, which would bury both the potential victims and the rescuers. The rescue operation began with a careful and dangerous effort to stabilize the entrance. The team used pneumatic shores, cribbing, and bracing materials to secure the entrance and the first part of the mine shaft. The work was slow, done under the constant threat of structural failure. The air coming from the mine was cool and stale, smelling of dust, decay, and damp earth. While the stabilization work was ongoing, the rescue team deployed their own acoustic monitoring equipment, confirming the high-frequency signal Dr. Pute had detected. The signal was stronger here, echoing within the confined space of the mine shaft. It was an eerie feeling standing in the silent desert, knowing that their equipment was picking up a sound their ears couldn't hear, a sound that had been broadcasting continuously for 3 years. Once the entrance was considered stable enough, the rescue team started their descent. The first part of the mine was a steep, rubble-filled slope, the remains of the collapse that had likely trapped the women. The darkness was total, broken only by the beams of their headlamps. The air was thick with dust, reducing visibility and requiring the use of respirators. The sounds of their breathing apparatuses and the crunch of their boots on the loose rock were the only noises in the oppressive silence. As they went deeper into the mine, they started finding signs of human passage. Footprints in the dust, moved rocks, and discarded items confirmed that someone had been there. The trail led them through a series of narrow, winding tunnels deeper into the mesa's core. The environment was suffocating, with the constant, noticeable pressure of the rock above them. About 100 yards into the mine system, in a small chamber protected from the main tunnel, they made a significant discovery. It was a makeshift camp. The scene told a story of desperate survival. The beams of their headlamps swept over the area, lighting up the remnants of a long and difficult ordeal. Empty food wrappers, the special packaging for dehydrated backpacking meals, were scattered on the dusty floor. Dozens of depleted batteries were piled in a corner, showing they had used their lights extensively. 2 sleeping bags were laid out, one partially covered by a thick layer of dust. The discovery confirmed the investigators' grim theory. Imogen and Olesia had survived the initial fall. They had likely been walking over the poorly supported ground near the mine entrance when it gave way, dropping them into the darkness below. Trapped underground with no way to climb out through the collapsed entrance, they had set up this camp, combining their resources and trying to survive. An analysis of the scene suggested they had lived underground for a significant period, likely weeks. The amount of consumed supplies indicated a prolonged effort to ration their food and water. They had tried to survive in the absolute darkness, waiting for a rescue that never came. The atmosphere in the chamber was heavy with the tragedy of their ordeal. The rescuers moved through the scene carefully, documenting the evidence, the silence broken only by occasional radio communications with the surface. The acoustic signal continued, louder now, pulling them deeper into the mine. The rescue team used their equipment to track the sound, following the echoes through the twisting tunnels. The signal seemed to be coming from a section of the mine that had suffered a major internal collapse. They pinpointed the source of the signal. Wedged in the debris of the collapse, partially crushed by a fallen boulder, was the emergency SOS beacon. The device was still active, its small LED indicator light blinking faintly in the darkness, a testament to its long-lasting battery. The discovery of the beacon solved the mystery of the silent scream. Investigators examined the device, analyzing the damage and the nature of the malfunction. They determined that the impact of the fall or the subsequent collapse had caused a critical failure in the device's internal circuitry. The transmitter was damaged, making it unable to broadcast a standard distress signal on the correct emergency frequency. Instead, the damaged electronics were emitting a continuous, weak, high-frequency electronic noise, the ultrasonic scream. This malfunction explained why the beacon had never been detected by a monitoring center. It was broadcasting on the wrong frequency, a signal that was inaudible to humans and invisible to standard emergency receivers. But the unique geology of the region had played a role. The sandstone formations, with their specific density and composition, acted as a natural amplifier and conduit, channeling the ultrasonic signal through the rock, allowing it to be detected miles away in the Slot Canyon where Dr. Prowitt and his team had first recorded it. Investigators theorized that the women had connected their high-capacity solar power bank, originally for charging phones during their trek, to the damaged beacon in a desperate attempt to keep it working, allowing the weak signal to last far longer than the device's internal battery would have. The beacon had been screaming for help for 3 years, but the technology had failed them in the cruelest and most unusual way. The discovery of the damaged beacon explained why no distress signal was ever received. The women likely tried to activate it, unaware that it was malfunctioning. They waited for help, trusting in a technology that had let them down. With the source of the signal identified, the search for the women continued. The atmosphere inside the mine grew heavier. The evidence at the camp suggested a desperate struggle for survival, but the women's absence indicated a tragic end. The rescue team continued their search, moving past the beacon, deeper into the increasingly dangerous mine system. The tunnels became narrower, and the air quality worsened. Then, the cadaver dog with the team alerted intensely, focusing on a specific area ahead. The team approached cautiously. They were met with a scene of catastrophic destruction. A massive internal collapse had completely blocked the tunnel. Tons of boulders and rock had fallen from the ceiling, creating an impassable barrier. The dog alerted again, focusing on the base of the collapse. The team began the painstaking process of examining the debris field, their lights cutting through the dust. And then they saw it, a flash of color among the dull gray rock. It was the distinctive hot pink fabric of Imogen's jacket. They had found her. Imogen's body was trapped under tons of boulders. The nature of the collapse was immediately clear. Imogen had been caught in the secondary collapse. The weight of the rock had killed her instantly. Based on the layers of dust and the state of the remains, the collapse had happened long ago, likely shortly after the women established their camp. The discovery confirmed the tragic fate of one of the women. The search for Olesia Kaspari continued, but the discovery of Imogen's body cast a dark shadow over the operation. If Olesia had been at the camp when the collapse occurred, she would have been left alone in the absolute darkness with the body of her best friend. The report from the mine rescue team leader to the surface was delivered with professional finality, but the implications were devastating. Imogen had been found, but recovery was impossible. The structural instability of the mine, especially in the area of the collapse that entombed her body, was too severe. The assessment concluded that any attempt to excavate the remains would be a life-threatening operation, with a high chance of triggering a catastrophic secondary collapse. The news hit Rowan with the force of a physical blow. After 3 years of agonizing uncertainty, the confirmation of his daughter's death was a brutal closure. But the inability to recover her body, to bring her home and lay her to rest, added a layer of agonizing cruelty to the tragedy. Authorities made the difficult decision to bring Rowan to the mine site. They needed him to understand the reality of the situation, to see the treacherous environment for himself. He arrived by helicopter, the desolate landscape unfolding beneath him. The mine, a scar on the earth, was now the center of a somber operation. At the mine's entrance, the rescue team leader explained the situation using diagrams and sensor data to show the instability of the underground structure. He detailed the risks involved in any recovery attempt. It was a conversation no parent should ever have to endure. While recovering Imogen's body was impossible, the rescue team had managed to retrieve a crucial piece of evidence. Imogen's backpack had been partially accessible near the edge of the collapse zone. They had carefully pulled it out during their initial survey and brought it to the surface. Inside the backpack, among the remaining
Okay.
supplies and personal items, they found the handgun Rowan had insisted she carry. It was secured in its holster, fully loaded, and had not been fired. This confirmed that she had not faced a threat from wildlife or other humans before the collapse. Her death was a tragic accident, a consequence of the dangerous environment. Rowan, standing at the entrance of the mine that had claimed his daughter's life, faced an agonizing decision. The authorities proposed permanently sealing the mine to prevent future tragedies and secure the site. This meant accepting that Imogen would remain underground, entombed in the darkness. With a heavy heart, Rowan agreed. It was the only way to ensure that no one else would be endangered by the unstable mine. He requested that the mine be sealed completely, turning it into Imogen's final resting place. A few days later, demolition experts arrived at the site. They strategically placed explosive charges at the mine's entrance, calculating the blast to cause a controlled collapse that would seal the opening completely. The detonation echoed through the canyons, a final thunderous punctuation to the tragedy. The entrance collapsed, permanently sealing the mine. The dust settled, and silence returned. With the mine sealed and Imogen's fate confirmed, the investigation's focus shifted entirely to Olesia Kaspari. The discovery of the makeshift camp proved that Olesia had also fallen into the mine and survived the initial ordeal. The analysis of the camp suggested that both women were alive for several weeks underground. The critical question now was what happened to Olesia. Investigators hypothesized that the collapse that killed Imogen had happened while both women were in the mine. If Olesia had been elsewhere in the tunnel system at the time, she might have survived the collapse, only to find herself trapped alone in the darkness. The search of the accessible parts of the mine had found no trace of Olesia's body. This suggested two possibilities. Either her body was buried in an inaccessible section of the mine, perhaps in the same collapse that killed Imogen, or she had found another way out. The latter seemed unlikely. The mine was old and complex, but the main entrance was the only known exit. However, the investigators refused to dismiss the possibility. If Olesia had escaped the mine, the case would change dramatically. To explore this possibility, investigators commissioned an aerial LiDAR survey of the area. LiDAR, or light detection and ranging, is a remote sensing method that uses pulsed laser light to measure distances to the Earth. It can see through vegetation and create detailed three-dimensional maps of the terrain, revealing subtle features that might be missed by traditional aerial photography. The LiDAR survey mapped the underground structure of the mine, revealing the extent of the tunnel system and identifying potential anomalies. The analysis of the data revealed something unexpected. On the opposite side of the mesa from the main entrance, the survey identified a narrow vertical shaft extending from the underground tunnels to the surface. This was likely an old ventilation shaft designed to circulate air in the mine. It was too narrow for a person to easily climb, but in a desperate situation, it might offer a potential escape route. A ground team was sent to the ventilation shaft's location. The top of the shaft was a small, inconspicuous opening in the rock, partially hidden by brush. It would have been nearly impossible to spot without the precise coordinates from the LiDAR survey. The team examined the opening, looking for any sign of human passage. The rock around the edge of the shaft was rough and weathered. Then they saw it. Caught on a sharp protrusion of rock, just inside the opening of the shaft were tiny traces of fabric fibers. The fibers were carefully collected and sent for forensic analysis. The results were stunning. The fibers were synthetic, consistent with the material used in high-performance outdoor gear, and the color was a distinctive lime green. The analysis confirmed that the fibers matched the distinctive green hiking jacket Olesia Kaspari was wearing when she disappeared. The discovery was a complete game-changer. Olesia Kaspari had escaped the mine. The timeline was reconstructed based on the evidence found at the camp and the estimated rate of decomposition of Imogen's body. Investigators theorized that Olesia had managed to climb the ventilation shaft sometime around November 2019, likely driven by desperation after the collapse that killed Imogen and the depletion of their supplies. She had survived weeks underground, endured the trauma of witnessing her best friend's death, and managed a seemingly impossible escape from the darkness. She had emerged onto the surface alive. The mystery deepened. If Olesia escaped the mine in November 2019, why did she never reach civilization? The desert was vast and harsh, but she was an experienced hiker, resourceful, and determined. She should have been able to navigate to the nearest road or settlement. The investigation was no longer about a tragic accident in an abandoned mine. It was about what happened to Olesia Kaspari after she emerged from the darkness, alone and desperate, into the empty expanse of the Utah desert. The confirmation of Olesia Kaspari's escape reignited the investigation with a new sense of urgency. The focus shifted from the sealed mine to the vast empty landscape surrounding it. A renewed search was launched, fanning out from the ventilation shaft exit. Investigators tried to piece together Olesia's likely path. She would have emerged onto the surface malnourished, dehydrated, and traumatized. Her gear was depleted, and the emergency SOS beacon was damaged and left behind in the mine. She was alone in the middle of nowhere with winter approaching. The search teams meticulously scanned the terrain, looking for any sign of her passage. But the trail was 3 years old. The desert environment, with its relentless wind and occasional flash floods, had long since erased any footprints or discarded items. The search yielded nothing. The investigation stalled again. The mystery of Olesia's fate remained unsolved. Had she died from the elements, her body lost in the vast wilderness, or had something else happened? The breakthrough came several months later, in early 2023, from an unexpected source. A Bureau of Land Management, BLM, surveyor was working in the area, documenting illegal fencing on public land. The remote regions of the Utah desert were a mix of public and private land, and disputes over boundaries and grazing rights were common. The surveyor was following a contested fence line bordering a large, isolated ranch. This area was far from any roads, characterized by rolling hills and sparse vegetation. The ranch was known for its reclusive owner, who fiercely guarded his privacy and property. While documenting a section of the fence line that intruded on public land, the surveyor noticed something unusual. A pile of old tires and ranch debris was visible near the fence, partially hidden in a dry wash. It looked like an illegal dumping site. The surveyor approached the debris pile to document the violation. As he got closer, he noticed a strange odor, a faint scent of decomposition mixed with the smell of old rubber and dust. He began to move some of the debris, investigating the extent of the dumping. He pulled back an old cracked tire and froze. Beneath the debris, partially buried in the dry earth, was a human skeleton. The surveyor immediately secured the scene and alerted the authorities. The remote location required a specialized forensic team to be dispatched. The remains were carefully excavated and transported to the medical examiner's office. The skeleton was incomplete, scattered by scavengers, but the forensic analysis provided a positive identification. Through dental records and DNA analysis, the remains were confirmed to be those of Olesia Kaspari. The discovery was devastating. Olesia, who had survived the horrors of the mine, had died in the open desert, her body discarded like trash under a pile of old tires. The initial assumption was that she had succumbed to the elements shortly after escaping the mine, and her body had been concealed by the shifting sands until the surveyor stumbled upon it. But the autopsy revealed a horrifying twist. The forensic examination determined that Olesia was severely malnourished and dehydrated at the time of her death, consistent with her ordeal in the mine and subsequent exposure. However, the examination also revealed evidence of significant trauma that could not be explained by an accidental death. The skeletal remains showed evidence of blunt force trauma to the skull and ribs inflicted near the time of death. Furthermore, the forensic anthropologist identified subtle fractures and injuries consistent with severe physical and sexual abuse. The case was immediately reclassified as a homicide. Olesia Kaspari had not died of exposure. She had been murdered. The realization sent shock waves through the investigation. The narrative of a tragic hiking accident had been shattered. Olesia had survived the mine only to encounter a predator in the remote desert. The investigation now focused on identifying the killer. The location where the remains were found, near the border of the isolated ranch, immediately drew suspicion towards the owner. To build a compelling case, investigators needed to connect the ranch to the crime. The remnants of Olesia's clothing, including her distinctive green jacket, were found at the scene. They were degraded and weathered, but they held vital clues. The forensics team meticulously analyzed the fibers, searching for anything that could identify the perpetrator or the crime's location. The analysis revealed unusual trace evidence on Olesia's clothing. It wasn't just the typical dust and debris of the desert. Instead, the forensics team found chemical residues of an industrial-grade agricultural disinfectant. This type of disinfectant is commonly used in large-scale livestock operations to clean stalls and equipment, and it's not something Olesia would have come across in the wild. The analysis also identified unique synthetic fibers embedded in the fabric of her jacket. These weren't from her own gear. They were specialized high-strength fibers used in the manufacturing of high-end horse tack, such as saddles, harnesses, and ropes. The combination of the agricultural disinfectant and the specialized horse tack fibers pointed to a specific environment, a working ranch specializing in high-quality horses. This unique trace evidence was the key breakthrough. It linked Olesia's death to a specific location and provided a direct lead to the perpetrator. The investigation now turned its full attention to the isolated ranch bordering the site where Olesia's remains were found. The desert, which had held its secrets for so long, was finally beginning to reveal the truth about Olesia Kaspari's tragic fate. The unique signature of the trace evidence, the industrial-grade agricultural disinfectant, and the specialized synthetic fibers, allowed investigators to narrow their focus significantly. These materials were not common in the sparsely populated region. The primary target was the large, isolated ranch adjacent to where Olesia Kaspari's remains were discovered, owned by a man named Sterling Bracken. Bracken, in his late 50s, was a reclusive figure known locally for being fiercely territorial and hostile toward outsiders. He lived alone on the sprawling property, managing a small but high-quality horse breeding operation. Bracken had a reputation for being abrasive and volatile, and a background check revealed a prior criminal record for assault from a violent dispute over grazing rights several years earlier. Bracken immediately became the prime suspect. The body's location, the trace evidence matching his ranching operation, and his known propensity for violence created a compelling circumstantial case. He knew about the missing hikers and feared that his criminal record would lead authorities to blame him for her death. He made the fateful decision to hide the body, concealing it under a pile of tires and debris near the fence line, hoping it would never be found. Bracken's story was plausible on the surface. It explained how Olesia's body ended up on his property and acknowledged his role in concealing her death. But the detectives were skeptical. Bracken's demeanor was too controlled, his narrative too convenient, and his story didn't explain the evidence of blunt force trauma and sexual abuse found on Olesia's remains. When the detectives pressed him on the details of her injuries, Bracken became evasive again, claiming he didn't remember the specifics and that she was already severely injured when he found her. The detectives knew they needed more evidence to break through Bracken's carefully constructed facade. They secured a search warrant for his property based on the trace evidence and the proximity of the body. The search of the ranch was extensive. The property was large, with multiple outbuildings, barns, and storage sheds. The investigators focused on areas where Bracken might have held Olesia captive. They zeroed in on a remote and used bunkhouse situated far from the main house near the horse stables. The bunkhouse appeared dilapidated and abandoned from the outside. But as the investigators entered, they were hit by an overwhelming odor, the same agricultural disinfectant found on Olesia's clothing. The smell was strong, suggesting a recent, aggressive cleaning attempt. The bunkhouse had been stripped bare, the furniture removed, and the floors scrubbed clean. But the pervasive smell indicated that something had happened there, something Bracken wanted to conceal. The investigators meticulously processed the scene, using specialized techniques to detect latent evidence. They used luminol to search for bloodstains, but the aggressive cleaning had removed any trace. The breakthrough came during a detailed search of the structure itself. One of the investigators noticed a loose floorboard near the back wall. He carefully lifted the board, and beneath it, hidden in the dark cavity, they found them, restraints. They weren't standard handcuffs or ropes. They were fashioned from the same specialized horse tack material found on Olesia's remains. The unique synthetic fibers matched perfectly. The discovery of the restraints shattered Bracken's narrative. They were clear evidence of captivity and abuse. Olesia had not died naturally shortly after arriving at the ranch. She had been held captive, restrained, and abused. The evidence suggested a horrific sequence of events. Olesia, desperate and vulnerable after escaping the mine, had encountered Sterling Bracken. But instead of helping her, Bracken saw her desperation as an opportunity. He had abducted her, taken her to the remote bunkhouse, and subjected her to prolonged abuse. The blunt force trauma indicated that she had fought back or that Bracken had become violent. The exact circumstances of her death remained unclear, but the evidence strongly suggested that Bracken had murdered her, either intentionally or as a result of the abuse. The discovery of the restraints, combined with the trace evidence and the autopsy findings, provided the definitive proof needed to charge Sterling Bracken with the kidnapping, sexual abuse, and murder of Olesia Kaspari. The opportunist who had preyed on the vulnerable and relied on the isolation of the desert to conceal his crimes had finally been brought to justice. The trial of Sterling Bracken began in mid-2023, nearly 4 years after Olesia Kaspari's disappearance. The case had captured the attention of regional media, the horrific details of the dual tragedy captivating and appalling the public. The courtroom was tense. Rowan Vez sat in the front row, his face etched with grief, representing both his daughter Imogen and her best friend Olesia. Sterling Bracken remained stoic throughout the proceedings. He maintained his refusal to confess, sticking to his original narrative that Olesia had died of natural causes, and he had simply panicked and concealed the body. The prosecution presented a meticulous and overwhelming case, weaving together the circumstantial evidence, the forensic findings, and the timeline of events. They painted a devastating picture of the two women's ordeal. They described the initial accident, the fall into the abandoned mine, and the desperate struggle for survival in the darkness. They detailed the discovery of the makeshift camp and the damaged SOS beacon, the electronic scream that had gone unheard for 3 years. They recounted the tragic death of Imogen, crushed in the cave-in, her body forever entombed in the sealed mine. Then, the prosecution focused on Olesia Kaspari's remarkable escape, the climb up the ventilation shaft, and her emergence onto the surface, alive but vulnerable. They emphasized the horrific twist of fate, Olesia having survived the impossible, only to encounter Sterling Bracken. The prosecution argued that Bracken saw Olesia's desperate state, not as a cry for help, but as an opportunity. He had abducted her, taken her to the remote bunkhouse on his ranch, and subjected her to unimaginable abuse. The key evidence was the unique trace evidence found on Olesia's remains. The agricultural disinfectant and the specialized horse tack fibers linked her directly to Bracken's ranch. The prosecution presented expert testimony explaining the rarity of these materials and the significance of their presence on her clothing. The climax of the trial was the presentation of the restraints found hidden under the bunkhouse floorboard. The prosecution displayed the restraints to the jury, the specialized horse tack material matching the fibers found on Olesia's remains. This physical evidence directly contradicted Bracken's narrative and strongly suggested captivity and abuse. The defense attempted to create reasonable doubt, arguing that the evidence was circumstantial and that there was no definitive proof that Bracken had murdered Olesia. They emphasized the lack of DNA evidence linking Bracken to the crime, attributing it to the degradation of the remains and the aggressive cleaning of the bunkhouse. But the totality of the evidence was too compelling. The combination of the body's location, the trace evidence, the autopsy findings indicating sexual abuse and blunt force trauma, and the discovery of the restraints created a narrative that was impossible to ignore. After several days of deliberation, the jury reached a verdict. Sterling Bracken was found guilty on all counts: kidnapping, sexual abuse, and felony murder. He was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. The case closed on the dual tragedy, uncovered by the anomalous sound of a damaged SOS beacon. The chance discovery by the acoustic researchers had set in motion a chain of events that revealed the horrifying truth about the disappearance of Imogen and Olesia Kaspari. Imogen Velas remains entombed within the sealed Utah mine, her final resting place marked only by the vast, silent expanse of the desert. A decision made by her father, Rowan, to protect others from the same fate. Olesia Kaspari survived the initial ordeal, emerging from the darkness with a fierce will to live, only to meet a horrific end at the hands of an opportunistic predator in the remote, unforgiving wilderness.